Good afternoon or good evening.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm extremely well.
Good.
Well,
Good afternoon
yeah, I'm working on a
or
couple.
good evening.
Good evening, good afternoon. Yes, just a second. Hello, how are you today?
I'm fine. How are you?
Extremely well.
Good.
Well,
Good afternoon.
all righty. How are things going for you, Miranda?
Everything's going well. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Oh, I am excited about today. Everything's going well. No major complaints in my life.
Yes, same here.
That's good. That's good. How's your husband doing?
He's doing great. We are all introverts, so we're loving this time trying to stay home. So my kids, my husband and I, this has been a really a phase of relaxation for us. So I guess that's a slight silver lining considering everything that's going on right now.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm an introvert also, so I understand that, and I feel the same way. I've enjoyed this time, and especially the last couple of days here in our area. We've been snowed in, so that was really, really exciting for me. So I got a chance to get some R&R. Uh,
I mean, we were one of the handful of people that didn't lose power for long. So we
mhm.
lost power, but it was very quick. So, I feel incredibly blessed that we all are in good health. We survived the snow apocalypse, as people say. So I really feel like I have no grounds to complain.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, and especially, during these times that we're in right now, there's so many people who are on edge about everything.
Right,
From the election to you just name the thing. There are people who are on edge about everything.
right,
And on top of that, you have the pandemic. On top of the pandemic, then you have this weather occurrence that doesn't happen often,
right,
that snows us in and keeps
right,
us isolated even more. So,
right.
but overall, I think we have the ability to make it through these particular situations. So,
Agreed.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a few minutes after, there's a few people who are going to join us. We have a person by the name of Dr. Sizer who is going to join us. You remember the last time we spoke, we talked about actually having somebody from a mental health standpoint to be engaged in this conversation. Well, he's going to be on tonight as an observer, and at the latter part of it, he may interject himself at some time during the latter part of the conversation. And then next week, part of our dialogue is going to be about the mental health issues that we're experiencing from the pandemic, from all kinds of other stuff that we deal with as African American people and as people of color. There's a lot of similarities that we're dealing with, especially now in the California area. The Asian American community is dealing with this hate issue that has seemed to come out of nowhere. I think that there are some issues that we really need to deal with and talk through. But with that, let's go ahead and get started at this point with the conversation about how I survived the coronavirus. I know, of course, I think you've taken your shot. I'm waiting to take mine. There are people who have said, well, it takes a long time to get your shot. Well, I tested the system with my mother.
Okay.
She's in her 70s, and we were on the phone. Matter of fact, it was last Friday, Friday before last, she and I were on the phone. And she said, well, I want to give the shot. You think it's okay? I said, yes, ma'am, I think it's okay.
Okay.
And I called the Walmart pharmacy, and which is online. I set up one appointment there, which was the safe keep. And then
Okay.
I called our local hospital.
Okay.
In the local hospital, I talked with a person, and the person says, can she come in Saturday at
All
2:30?
right.
So that's what happened. So what I'm saying is that we hear a lot of issues, a lot of people talking about they can't get in, but in some of the communities, smaller communities, there are opportunities there. And even though in the big cities, there are issues, but in some of the smaller communities,
Agreed.
people do have access. So with that, if you could give us a high level overview of the coronavirus, what it is,
Mm-hmm.
how it came into existence, and give us some details as it relates to that, because there may be some folks who really don't know what it is. They've only heard it's the coronavirus and it's causing people to go to the hospital and then they can't breathe.
Right. So thank you so much for having me. The coronavirus is a class of RNA viruses that function. They have a certain modality of infection or infecting a host. The specific coronavirus that we've been referring to today is the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It is very similar to past SARS viruses that we've seen in the past. It belongs to the same family of viruses. It has very similar modalities of infection. And when you talk about SARS-CoV-2, that's the formal name of the virus. It stands for severe acute respiratory coronavirus-2. It's the second one that we've had in terms of a major pandemic. And usually when you talk about COVID-19, that is the actual disease that people get, or they deal with when they get infected with this virus. And so just sort of a high level overview, the virus, a pastor or Bishop Riley has a picture of the virus in his background. And yeah, it's actually a beautiful virus. It's not nice to us, but it's a really beautiful virus. And on the surface of that virus, you see what we call the spike protein. So that spike is encoded by a piece of RNA that's part of the genome of coronavirus. And that spike has been the source of how we've created the current vaccine. And so normally what happens is if you think about a virus, especially the coronaviruses, they have sort of this greasy outer surface, and they have this spike protein. So what happens is that through respiratory droplets from an infected individual, through your respiratory system, you inhale the particles of this virus, and depending on the viral load, the chances of the virus coming in contact to its target cell, which is a lung cell, become higher. The higher the sort of viral load, or how many viral particles are in those droplets. And so what happens is, as it's traversing or traveling down the respiratory system, it attaches to its specific target, a protein that it recognizes on the lung cell, which tells it this is a lung cell and this is the cell that I really love infecting. And that spike protein is what helps the virus sort of recognize the target on the surface of the cell, of the lung cell. It injects its RNA or its genome into the host cell. And because the host cell cannot tell the difference between our own RNA and the viral RNA, our host cell begins making a lot of proteins that are then used to assemble more virus. And over time, what happens is as that cell produces more and more viral particles, that cell explodes and outpours millions and millions of viral particles. And as they float along the respiratory system, they infect more and more cells, and you have a cycle of infection.
Okay, so you said something about a viral load.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. Viral load is a very fancy way of saying just the number of particles, a concentration of a number of viruses that are in sort of a solution or a sample. So let's say, for instance, someone sneezes on you. There are millions of respiratory droplets that are expired into the air. And those droplets contain, a lot of viruses, right? And so depending on how many of those you inhale, whether it's, tens of dozens of viral particles versus thousands, will depend on your likelihood of contracting the disease. So this is why, the theory of touching surfaces, originally when the virus, when we first learned about that the virus was sort of caught wreaking havoc across the globe, everyone was washing their hands, everyone was, disinfecting surfaces. The data typically show that the chances of you getting coronavirus from touching a surface and then touching your mouth or your nose or any area of your face is actually pretty low. Touching surfaces is actually pretty low. And usually the number one mode of transmission is usually respiratory droplets. Somebody sneezing, coughing, breathing on you. There are viral particles in those respiratory samples that touch surfaces, but they're so low. And remember, this is an RNA virus, and RNA is really unstable. So, it can last on surfaces, but it's very unstable on surfaces. So this is why, when the pandemic first started, everybody was wiping everything down. Everyone was sort of, washing their hands, which was great for personal hygiene. But now if you go to the airport like I do, they're loading planes just like they were before the pandemic. It's not taking long because it's just the chances of you getting coronavirus from touching a surface. It's not that it's impossible, but it's highly unlikely. Most people are getting coronavirus from talking to someone sneezing on them, sharing. It's usually from respiratory droplets in the air.
With these, we've been told that the surfaces, it lasts 14 days on the surfaces. It's in the mail. It's just all kinds of stuff that's out there. And so there was a rush for Lysol. There was no Lysol.
They were selling for $50 a can in some instances.
I know. From a scientific standpoint, how did that even happen?
So I think that with any pandemic, remember, let us not forget that people were buying toilet paper left and right? They thought it was, you think about a respiratory disease. Why are people buying toilet paper? Because people thought it was people thought that it was causing, it was sort of it causes an upset stomach. So, I think when you have a brand new unknown disease that is spreading like wildfire, it's very common for people to worry about, having something because they're going to be apparently going to the restroom pretty often, or, having something to clean because people are worried, or, having something to calm your own nerves. But as we begin to learn a lot more about the virus, as we had a lot more data, as we begin to see more infections, you don't typically see, you can just see it right now. You don't go into a restaurant and everybody's wiping down everything all the time. As much as you saw, you don't even see people going to wash their hands or people using, disinfectant on their hands quite as much. It's because we know a lot more about the virus. And like many pandemics, over time you get fatigued, people stop doing it. And I don't think that the infection rates have been, as, it hasn't really been significantly impacted based on surfaces, because if it were, you'd have many, many, many more people being infected by this virus. What we have seen is that from November to the present day, over half of the deaths for coronavirus were between November and February, versus if you compare to where we started from almost a year ago. And that is because Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's, those are holidays where it's cold outside, people are indoors, circulation of the air indoors, it takes, I forget how many hours it takes for the air to circulate inside and outside of the home from, indoor and outdoor air. So you have particles in the air. People come to your house, they have their masks on, and, then you sit down next to them at the dinner table and eat a meal. And you're all talking, just the act of talking, viral particles are, and that's the whole 6 feet, because, they've done the sort of science to determine how far can a viral particle, how far can it travel? And while viruses do travel very long distances, on average, it's about 6 feet. So, if you're not, unless you have a very long table and a very large house, people aren't really sitting 6 feet apart. And even when the person to your left and your right is 6 feet, if they can sit 6 feet apart from you, the person in front of you certainly isn't.
Okay.
The person diagonal from you, maybe not. So you're looking for, essentially you have all the conditions that are right for a super spreader event. And the White House is a really good example of, even when you have testing, it's the reason why people that test negative still can infect people. A negative test doesn't mean you don't have coronavirus. A negative test just means that the viral load, or the concentration of viral particles in the nasal passages, is not high enough to detect by PCR. So
okay,
this is, go ahead.
You said PCR. What is a PCR?
Okay. PCR is polymerase chain reaction. So that is so it's a process of taking a single strand of a nucleic acid, such as RNA. So if I swab your nose, right, and I take that sample, dissolve it in a liquid, dip it in a liquid, and then take, hopefully I have enough concentration of viral particles that when I take a portion of that liquid and put it in a reaction, that's going to detect and make make millions of copies of that viral particle, that piece of, nucleic acid that's there. When I run it on a gel, so let me run back. Do you remember the O.J. Simpson case?
Yes, I remember.
Okay, you remember there was this huge controversy over the Southern blot. I don't know if you remember that, the Southern blot, the DNA sample, the bands, the lines, that's not quite the same, but it's when you amplify a single piece of genetic material to make millions of copies of it. The only way you can make millions of copies of it is you have to have a template. It has to be present to detect it, right? So when you get a negative test, the assumption is that if you try to make millions and millions of copies and you run it on a gel to determine whether or not you can detect it, if you don't see anything, the assumption is that you don't have the virus, right?
Yes.
But just because you don't see the virus, remember, you only took a portion of the sample from the nose. You only tried to amplify what you suspended in water, in a soluble solution. You don't have enough, you won't detect it, but it doesn't mean that you are negative. It just means that there's not enough virus to be detected, to say that you actively have SARS-CoV-2.
Okay, so is that they were saying that there are people who are false positive and false negative. Is that
That's correct.
Okay.
So that's correct. What I just explained to you is a false negative, where somebody actually has the disease, but they're not actively shedding viral particles. So when you swab their nose, the PCR, polymerase chain reaction that you're using, RT-PCR, cannot detect. A false positive is when somebody that has actively had an infection, such as yourself, goes back a month later and still tests positive, because there are remnants of dead virus still in your respiratory system. Okay. So you're going to test positive by PCR, because PCR will only tell you, can I detect, can I not detect? It doesn't necessarily tell you if there's an active infection happening. The only way to tell if an active infection is happening is through serum, right? Okay. Taking antibodies from someone and determining if they have, they're reactive to coronavirus, right? So understanding the limitations of the test, of each test, is really important. Okay. Because a PCR will only tell you, are there viral particles present? But the presence of viral particles does not mean you have an infection. So this is why people that are beyond infection still test positive, right? Because it takes time to clear dead virus from the system.
Oh, okay, so help me understand. So I tested positive, and so I can go back to the doctor and be retested and still be positive.
Yes.
Okay.
And that can mean one or two things. Either you no longer have an active infection, but you still have remnants of a previous infection in your respiratory system, or you are still actively infected with the corona, or you still have an active infection. And the only way to determine between those two possibilities is through an antibody test.
Okay. All right. So at this point, if I want to know if I'm not still active
antibody
or still
test.
positive, I need to go take an antibody test.
You need to test that's correct.
Got to test my antibody. Okay.
That's right.
Okay. Okay. All right. So
because that will tell you if you have an active infection.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. All right. Pastor Reed says he has a question. Go ahead, Pastor Reed.
Yes, I want to ask a question about blood types. I've heard that A positive, AB, they are real susceptible to the virus, whereas B does not. It's not as but O positive is not very receptive of it, because I'm O positive. I've had my wife, my daughters both had it. I work in the school system and everything. I do everything that they tell me to do. I've had 2 antibodies tested and I have no antibodies.
So how do I answer this? I have heard about sort of the claims that different blood types have different susceptibilities to the disease. However, there is conflicting data out there. And here's why I'll tell you, I don't know necessarily if I support the idea that different blood types have different infection rates, and I'll tell you why. So when you look at, I'll just take Black, white, and Hispanic people in the US. Let's just start there. Black and white people contract the disease at the same rate. There's no difference in the rate of infection between those two groups. Native Americans and white contract the disease about 2 times higher than white people, and Hispanic people contract. Now, I'm just only comparing to white people. So you compare Hispanic people to whites in America, they contracted, I think it's like 1.5, 1.6 times higher than white people. That's just infection rates. Okay. typically most Black people are O positive. We get the same infection rate as whites. Hispanics, as I said, is about 1.6. They get it 1.6 times higher, almost not quite twice, but 1.5 times more likely to contract the disease than whites. Now let's look at death rate. If you set whites at 1x, and you compare that to blacks are likely 2 times as likely to die from it. Now, infection rate is the same, but death rate for blacks is twice. When you compare whites, the death rate for Hispanics, it's like 2.3 fold. When you compare it to Native Americans, it's somewhere like 2.9 fold. So regardless of blood type, what's more important to me is that people of color are dying at higher rates than whites. And when you look at the blood type, I think, if you look at Hispanic people, they are, contracting the disease at higher rates, dying at even blacks. They're almost dying at 3 times the rates as whites versus blacks 2 times the rate. When you look at the blood types in those groups, for the most part, blacks are typically O in America, but Hispanics are not always O. I think 60% are O and the rest are other blood types. So I would say to you that regardless of the blood type data, the take-home message should be that Black and brown people are dying at much, much, much higher rates. And I suspect that the infection rate in the Hispanic community and the infection rate in the Native community is because these are households that have multiple generations living in them, right? So when you talk about social distancing, these are communities and these are groups of people that are very centered on, generational living. So it is an honor to, have your grandmother and your great grandmother living with you, right? Compared to most, I would say, whites and blacks. And in that same situation, that is, a hallmark of these communities, it's also helped to spread the disease. But the death rate is something completely different, So, and that's because of underlying comorbidities.
And that's why I want to ask. That's why I want to ask, because if it's not the blood, it has to be something genetic, something in the
social
DNA.
And social, right? Social structures. You talk about, like in my house, we can all, go to different corners of the house. It's only 4 people in my home, right? We can social distance if needed. But when you have a multi-generation, the idea of social distancing is just non-existent, right? That's number one. So the social structure of a community plays a huge role in the infection rates. The second, as you said, is comorbidities. And not all comorbidities are genetic. Some comorbidity, obesity, it can be genetic, but it's not always genetic. You talk about high blood pressure, you talk about a COPD, you talk about a renal disease, you talk about other, a multitude of other illnesses that are typically common in the Black community that usually are centered around the diet. That's right. That's why it's not, you may be genetically prone to something, but you didn't, but sometimes it is because of habit, right? Overeating, eating a lot of fatty food. Yeah.
That's what my doctor told me when I told him, because I've been, quarantined and all it's been with this COVID. That's why I've gained so much weight. He said, that's not true. I said, yeah, because of COVID, I hadn't been able to move around. He said, that's not true. He said, COVID didn't make you eat. You did. He said, because let's deal with you. Because COVID didn't gain weight. COVID didn't tell you to eat. And so that's one thing that this pandemic has taught me, is that I have to take responsibility and charge of my health. If nobody wears a mask, I'm wearing one.
That's right.
Got me? I'm gonna continue to wash my hands because my immune system is low because I'm a kidney transplant patient, diabetes, and high blood pressure. That was not genetic. It was just me.
Yeah. But, I think that there are some diseases that we're prone to, such as high blood pressure, that were selected because of the slave trade, right? So,
wait.
I got to hear this one. I heard
Say
slave.
something.
Come on now.
You said something there that I don't think we have ever talked about.
mhm,
Slave trade and high blood pressure.
that's right.
I'm waiting on this one. Come on.
All right, go ahead.
So slaves that had high blood pressure were more likely to survive the conditions of transport across the Atlantic. And so you can imagine that in genetics, we call that a selection process. It's where a certain mutation or genetic disease sort of favors somebody or something in a stressful condition. And so this is very common across many organisms. It was a project that I studied when I was in graduate school, how some mutations that in normal conditions are not great for an organism can be life-saving under stressful conditions. And so if you think about the people that were more likely to survive happen to have, which I don't want to get into the mechanism, but they happen to have high blood pressure. What happens is the people that do survive and make it, that mutation, when the majority of the people that come to the new world have that mutation, what happens? They are forced to breed, and their offspring are 100% of their offspring have that mutation, right? It's not random anymore, it's a selection. And so a lot of Black people are predisposed for high blood pressure. And that dates back to the slave trade. Mm-hmm.
I got a question right there.
So that explains, Pastor Reed, let me
ahead,
get
bro.
this one.
I'm
so
swinging.
Every time I go to the doctor says to me, you need to have some high blood pressure pills. And I'm saying, I don't want to take them. I don't want them. However, what you just said is that we, as the descendants of those that survived the trip from across the ocean, are more likely to have high blood pressure.
I'm not going to give you an out for your doctor, but for talking to your doctor, but I hesitate to talk about that because usually when I do talk about it, a lot of people of color say, I have now a reason, why I have. So
because if the blood,
I don't want it.
But if the blood is the male's, it's actually saying, in my opinion, what I heard, if the blood is the male is the one that's transferring it because the female's blood doesn't touch, right?
Wait a minute, say that again.
When a male and a female have a baby, the blood that's in the child comes from the male, right?
No.
Oh no. My goodness, my doctors, I must have missed some. Come on, doc, help me out.
So, you get half of your chromosomes from your mom, half from your dad. That's it, right? So when you talk about, first of all, hematopoiesis, it's the creation or production of blood. You're talking about mature blood cells don't have nuclei. They don't contain genetic material. So when you talk about blood in the sense of, anything that does contain genetic material, except for the mitochondria, which is inherited by the mother, half of that genetic material came from the father, half came from the mother. That doesn't change. You don't get, when a sperm merges with an egg and you begin the process of blastulation, gastrulation, neurulation, following fertilization, there's no, this blood is from this person. These are cells that begin to divide, that turn into certain cell types, which then are differentiated for cell types that function in different systems. So the only thing that, in terms of one parent giving something to a child versus another parent, is the mitochondria. And the only reason for that is because the egg, when a sperm fertilizes the egg and they fuse, the mitochondria, their nuclei fuse, but the mitochondria is still from the egg. And so that's pretty much, that's it. But for the most part, anything that contains a nucleus, and genetic DNA, half it will always be from the mother, half will be for the father. But in terms of blood, mature blood cells lose their nuclei, so they don't contain nuclei.
Pastor Ray, does that help you?
Okay, well, I'll be going. But many doctors I've interviewed and talked about this for years. That's why they always ask for the male's blood. That's what I was taught. Like I said, this is my first time hearing this one. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, I've never. You said they asked for the male's blood?
I mean, when they test for, take a man's blood to find out if the baby's his, science is, all those different things. But I know science is.
But they're not testing the red blood cells. That's what a lot of people don't know. When you draw blood from somebody, remember I told you red blood cells don't have nuclei. The extraction of DNA is coming from white blood cells, other blood cells. They're not coming from red blood cells.
Okay. All right. I don't get embarrassed.
Usually they don't take it from the mom because your baby.
Really?
Usually you birth the child.
Going on
they don't usually take. I've never had a father go to the hospital and say you're not the mother.
Just keep on living.
Unless there's some kind of. But usually we do take a cheek swab. A cheek swab from the father. People don't typically do DNA testing from blood, but they do, of course, some crime scenes. Usually they just take a cheek swab because usually it's not the father denying the mother, maternity. It's usually the father denying his paternity. That's, I know we got way off, but.
Way on because let me say this, you're way on for me. Because we've been teaching generational. My mama had high blood pressure. That's why I have high blood pressure.
Right.
My dad died of colon cancer. And because of that, they say I'm a high risk. So I go get a colonoscopy every year for the last almost 18 to 20 years. And they've been finding polyps. So that's why I was asking.
Yes. So I would say that, usually when you go to get a colonoscopy or any checkup for, to sort of detect early stages of cancer, the first question they ask you is, do you have a history of cancer in your family? Because many mutations that cause cancer are in fact inherited. So BRCA, everybody knows about BRCA with breast cancer, P53 mutations, mutations in tumor suppressors or oncogenes. Those usually, those can be inherited, but they don't have to be. Sometimes, exposure to the environment. So you think about skin cancers, right? It's not that you inherit, usually people with fair complexion, they don't produce as much, melanin, or they absorb UV light better than other people because of, it's a selection for countries where it was dark for longer periods of time. So, there was genetic pressure to select survival of people that had fair complexion, red hair, so that they were better absorbers of the light, right? Or sunlight. So, when you think about skin cancer, typically it's because of exposure to the sun, which causes changes in the genetic material in that region of the skin that's exposed, which results in cancer. But when you talk about things like colon cancer, where you can't really do a whole lot of sun exposure there, when you talk about things like breast cancer, when you talk about things like pancreatic cancer, a lot of times those are because of inherited mutations or environmental stress or pressures, right? And so, and what people don't know this, the longer we live, I hate to say this, but as people grow older and older over time, the more likely the death from cancer becomes, right? Ultimately, the longer people live, there'll be a higher number of people dying from cancer, because eventually, one cell, it just takes one cell to have, one cell to then have some event that mutates the DNA that results in uncontrolled growth. And so, I'm very thankful that people live longer, but the result typically in a society where people are living 30, 40 years longer than they did, pre-depression era, is cancer. And so I suspect that, you're going to see a lot of, this is why there's been a ramp up of cancer treatments. Now you have the newest, most hottest cancer treatment, which is immunotherapy, where they take your own immune cells, they treat them, and then they re-put them back inside of you to fight your own cancer. That was a technology pioneered by Jim Allison, who works at MD Anderson, who just won the Nobel Prize a year or so ago. I'm happy that I was able to shake his hand. But there are, as we get older, as you have an aging society, the likelihood of cancer is going to definitely increase.
So as you're talking about cancer, for instance, but also you talked about SARS-2. So are we going to experience more pandemics or more exposure to viruses similar to the one we just experienced recently?
So I'm actually surprised it took this long. I mean, you have, as cost of living increases, you have people moving into closed, crowded living conditions. Everybody wants to move to New York. I go back and forth to Chicago. You have more people flying than ever before because, flights are now cheaper. I mean, if you wanted to take a trip next year to, Paris, right? Back in the day, that was the trip of a lifetime. Now that's a trip of a year. You know what I mean? Now that flights are cheap, they have package deals, which is the reason why we have the likelihood of a pandemic is much higher, because you have people traveling more, right? And this is why everybody's like, oh, the South African variant, the UK variant, the Australian variant, you have all these different variants of the SARS-CoV-2 that people are worried about. And I would say 30 years ago, that variant would have stayed in South Africa or UK or the respective country. But with such quick travel, I think the first case of, I can't remember which variant, I think it's the South African variant, was reported in New York a few days ago, I believe. And so, I mean, the first case in New York was just a few days ago. And so what I would say is that I'm actually surprised that this is our first pandemic, a major pandemic that has really impacted the entire globe. And I think there are two reasons why it's gotten so bad compared to something like Ebola, right? When Ebola hit, because Ebola is such a very quick, rapid, vicious, painful disease, where you bleed out of orifices. It's just terrible. And the chances of death are incredibly high. You get Ebola, actually survival rate is very low. So when those types of disease happen, they shut down the borders quick because nobody wants to die that way, right? And usually in a lot of third world countries, especially when you think about Americans, people are like, it's easy to shut the border down on a third world country, right? Because there's a stigma with third world countries. Even our president said something about third world countries. Now, in the case
Mhm.
of SARS, you had a disease, it was right for a pandemic because you had a disease causing agent that didn't make people so sick they always died, right?
Mhm.
You had
Mhm.
you had a condition where you have a superpower such as Wuhan, China, right? It came from Wuhan,
Mhm.
Wuhan market, that we are increasing relationships with. That's becoming a superpower on the global market. It's not considered really a third world country in many aspects. It's as a booming economy. And then you have the ability to fly. That wasn't really available. Like I said, 20, 30 years ago. And then
Mhm.
you have, on top of that, a president that didn't believe in science,
Mhm. Yeah.
that felt like if he just ignored it, it would go away because not that many people were dying. And
Mhm.
while it's true that only about 2% of the people that are infected with coronavirus die, compared to the flu, which is like 0.02 or something like that, it's pretty high. And that
Mhm.
is an actual low number, low percentage until you have millions of people infected, right? Then 2%
Mhm.
is a big number, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is what
Yeah.
happened here is that, you know, you hear about 350,000, 400,000, 500,000 deaths because so many people have gotten the disease. And
Mhm.
when you have a situation like that, it's ripe for the pandemic that we currently have. And then you have now, you can attest to this, I'd say 30, 40 years ago, people weren't as distrustful of the federal government. When the
Yeah.
government told you to wear a mask, you did what you were supposed to do. You were respectfully afraid of the federal government.
Mhm.
Nowadays, and America has moved less towards the community, and towards the
Mhm.
individual I. So, if
Mhm.
you think about the past 10 years, the do you movement, do what makes you happy. It's
Mhm.
all about me. What do I want? What makes me happy? You know, you have an individualistic society coupled with all those things I just mentioned has resulted in no mask wearing, right? My freedom, my rights, my individual rights, that has resulted in further spread of the disease coupled with non-belief in science, a president that said you just drink some bleach, inject bleach, that has resulted in massive spread of the disease, especially when the president announced that COVID made him stronger. So in Texas, for an example, we were having COVID parties. People were like having parties to hurry up and, get it and get over with because they thought that by getting the disease like the chickenpox, you would get herd immunity, right? You get the chickenpox once, you're typically immune from it, right? You don't get it a second time. But that's not how COVID works. So you had these mass hospitalizations and reinfection rates because of all of the above.
So, with this particular issue, you have the leadership who says, hey, this thing is not real. And then, on top of that, you have people who don't trust authority in general. And that's another discussion to talk about. And then, of course, you have a segment of the population, specifically the brown and community and African American, Asian American, Hispanics, and other nationalities, Native Americans, who are now dying at a rate
Yeah.
much higher than the majority population. And the
Mm-hmm.
majority population, I know some people will say, well, you just look down on white folks. No, this is not a look down on white folks. It's just there's something else that's causing this. And we've
Yeah.
alluded to this one before. It's called health disparities.
Yes.
There's some issues with the system
Yep.
that has created this. It bumped to the top. We all knew it existed, but when a pandemic hit, now we have it bubbling to the top.
Yep.
And yeah.
So I would say what's also interesting, what I didn't mention, is that Asian, the Asian population actually has, compared to the white population or the majority, the however you want to refer to it, population, they get it at 0.7 times. So they actually have a lower infection rate, the Asian community. And what's interesting is that not only do they have lower number of cases, but they also have about the same equal hospitalizations as whites, and a death rate the same as whites, even though they have it at the infection rate is less than whites. So it's been quite interesting. But I do think that is cultural, some of it, when you talk about disobedience. My parents lived in Japan for 3 years, and I remember visiting them, and this was maybe back in 2011, maybe not 2011, 2004. It was 2004. When did you come back from Japan? We can't hear you, but I think it was like 2000
We came back in 2007.
Okay, so I visited you in maybe 2004, 2005.
Right.
And I remember this was way before, the idea of a pandemic could happen. And I remember asking my mom, why are these people wearing face masks? It was a weird foreign concept. But in Japan, when you get sick, there's a respect for others.
Yeah.
So you wear a mask. And I kept thinking, oh, they're wearing a mask because they don't want to get sick. And I remember my mom telling me, no, they wear a mask so they don't get others sick.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why the infection rate is low in the Asian community is because it's customary in the culture. When you get sick, you keep yourself away from others. You wear a face mask. You really worry about, others are esteemed higher than self. And, you talk about, I think it's greater than disobedience. And what's interesting is that, the Bible tells us that we should esteem others higher than ourselves. But this is such an individual culture that it's really more about me. And if we were practicing that, the numbers or infection rates in the Christian community alone we wouldn't be talking about whites, blacks, Asians. We'd be talking about Christians versus the Muslim community versus other communities, right?
Right.
But what's interesting is that is our mandate. And, Christians, across the board, they don't stand out in terms of differences in infection rates. I don't have the data for that, but I'd be willing to, I guess that would probably be the case. But thinking about others, yeah.
And as you're talking about, the Christian community, there were so many churches who said, we're going to stay open and we're not going to listen to what the government says.
Right.
And, I've been pushing and sharing with people that, the Bible clearly says to us to, have respect and to obey the governing authority, because God is the one who puts people in power. And he removes people from power. Yes. And people who, whether we agree with the person in power or not,
that's right,
they're in power because of our disobedience.
Exactly.
And that's why we get the wicked rulers in position. And we say, well, why are they in power? You start looking back at, this issue with sin, and you have individual sin. You have, community sin, which is a regional thing, but you have a national sin. And when you start passing laws that are against the laws of God, you create another problem. So not to get down on the sin issue, but when it came to the Christian community, we had people who wore as a badge of honor to say that we're going to defy what the governmental authorities say. And we're going to go ahead and meet. And then they became these super spreader events and killed off half of their congregation. And, and fast forward, we have pastors and leaders now who are encouraging people not to take the vaccination. But my question to them is, and I'll keep pushing this, is one, are we mandated by God to be willing to be our brother's keeper. I guarantee you we're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves. And then secondly,
True.
we're obligated to be willing to do whatever we can to keep somebody alive. And I argued this point with a few people, and the point is that if we give somebody the virus knowingly because we refuse to wear a mask, are you considered to be a murderer?
Yeah.
Now, I don't want you to answer that one because that'll get you into another discussion. However, I really think that if we are, as a Christian community, that we have to be willing to stand up and say, we are our brother's keepers. We're going to take the lead on this, and we're willing to take this vaccination just like we took the 15 others when we were younger. And then for those of us who travel internationally, we'll go, if it's to go on a vacation, we're going to go what shop we need to go to wherever place we're going. We're going to take that shot.
That's right.
Because we're going to enjoy ourselves on the beach. Am I right about it? Amen, y'all.
You're very right. But I think I was talking to somebody not long ago, and what they said to me, there are several factors here. I definitely trust science. That's obvious. I'm a little biased as a scientist. So I just, put that disclaimer out there. I'm definitely biased, but I do think that, there's trust that has been lost, and it's deservingly lost. And second, I do think that the engagement of the Black community and the brown community has not been what it should have been. And then third, the government has a very bad history of waiting until the last minute to come to the table and talk to our leaders. And the Black community is typically led by spiritual leaders. They don't, if you want to reach the Black community, you go to the church, the barbershop, the beauty shop. Those are the three sort of places where you really get the message out. But that being said, I think sometimes the society sees scientists as the federal government. And I really want to stress the independence, but scientists can be employed by the federal government, but scientists have, a level of independence that, is not controlled by the federal government. And that's in, peer review published work. It doesn't matter if the federal government tells me this is what you need to publish. I can't publish it at the behest of anyone. My work will be critiqued, tested by competing labs that want the glory, the accolades, the fame, the potential Nobel Prize that comes with it. And this is the first time I would ever say that capitalism in science is actually working for America, because that selfishness in science keeps everyone honest, because your reputation is all you have. And if you really want to be respected as a scientist, you cannot waver or both sides of the line, because your reputation, your employability will forever be lost or difficult at the least. And so peer review is the process that keeps us honest. If an institution, the federal government, anyone tells me to publish something, they don't even have the power to publish it. It is your peers that review your work, test it, run you through the ringer, because they have it's in their best interest to dispute your work, especially if they're working on a similar project. So, when I think about people saying, well, this was published or this was quickly put out, I always tell people, think about the car. When I think, was it Ford put the first American vehicle out? I think it is, or maybe it wasn't Ford, but, it took years to come out with a new model. They did not produce a new Model T or whatever it was every year, right?
Right.
You had a car, you kept it for years because it was years. Nowadays, every 9 months, the 2022 will be out in October, of 2021, right? Because technology changes that allows you to mass produce, at the factory. That's the same with science. The minute we understand how to create vaccines, we build upon that technology to be more rapid, quick, and precise the next go round. So when people tell me, oh, they came up with this vaccine in 9 months or whatever it was, it can't be trustworthy. That's really not how science works. The minute you understand what the unique protein on that virus is, what the body recognizes as a foreign invader, you create an RNA that mimics only that part of the virus. You manufacture it, put it in a system that is deliverable into the cell, and boom, you have a vaccine. We make the flu virus a new version every year, and no one questions that. And so, when people are like, well, the difference with most vaccines, is that in the case of coronavirus, we had hundreds of labs, thousands of labs around the globe working towards the same goal because everybody wanted to get there first, right? And so, it's not like other research where you have 3 labs in the world working on something, or in the US. This was a concerted effort by the federal governments of many countries to move this forward. The US alone put hundreds of millions of dollars into research to move this forward, which allowed labs to stop their current research that specialize in these type of vaccine creation and exploration, to stop their current research and completely shift gears and focus on the coronavirus. That is the reason why we were able to move so quickly and create a vaccine within this record amount. And it's not even really a record because H1N1 was created in about the same time. But this is the reason why we were able to move so quickly. And when people tell me, science is supposed to get better, it's the reason why when you look at the difference between the iPhone 1 and the iPhone 12 or 13, there's a marked difference, right? Each year, I'd say every 6 to 8 months, they have a new iPhone. Whereas when iPhones first came out, they came out every year or two. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And so, technology is supposed to get better. That's my answer to people. But more importantly, I really do trust the science. I can pull it up and read it on my computer. I can go in the lab and repeat it. That is how it works. And so, when people are saying, it's this cloaked, it's, Tuskegee. And I'm like, well, between Tuskegee and present day, did you get any vaccines? And usually I say, let me see your arm. Do you have the smallpox mark?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what happened between Tuskegee and then? Did you start trusting the federal government then, or scientific institutions then? And usually people don't have an answer for me. But I would say that, 20 million people to date have been vaccinated in the US. And if this was some major, massive design by the government to track everyone, this is a really expensive way to do it. They can just use your cell phone. You look closely, there's a COVID tracker on there already. You use your car, your credit card. If the government tracked my credit card, they know everywhere I've been today. They know I went to Shipley's Donuts. They know I went to the grocery store. Because I don't carry cash. If they follow my car, because my car is part electric, they know what routes I took to get there. So I don't think that a vaccine is probably the most cost-effective way to track someone when your credit card and your cell phone can, it can do it for them.
Yeah. And you brought up about the time frame to actually move forward with creating this vaccine. I was talking with someone who is a computer scientist recently. He's working on his PhD, and just to understand the process, because early on when computers first came out, I was building computers, I was into the process. And so I understood specifically the science behind computers, but he started talking to me about something and some information that he was sharing with me. He said that when you were building computers, it may have taken us, a year or 2 years to process this complicated formula. He said it does it now in 30 seconds. And we're talking about, so the complicated processes that are available out there with the development of vaccines the computers are doing some of the work. Once they figure it out, the computers are making it, and they can, and so just to validate what you're saying is we're going to start getting, so Monday, by next Monday, they're going to have a solution or are headed down the road instead of what we have right now. Yeah.
Right.
Agreed. I mean, and I think that scares people more than anything. I think the idea of technology and science moving so quickly is something that people don't necessarily want to accept, because then it feeds into a lot of fears that they have, especially when you talk about the Bible and the days and, how technology is supposed to play a role in, a lot of what we read in Revelations. But, I would just say that, when you think about the Lord's Prayer, one of the things that's very common is, you're praying for God to come, right? You're preparing for that moment of his return. So it's quite interesting when people that at night on bended knee say the Lord's Prayer every night are also in fear of his return. So we should be looking towards that moment with hope, not necessarily fear.
That's true. That's true.
And I think that's part of the issue too, is that there are people who they had prayer chains, prayer calls, they had all kinds of stuff to pray and say, Lord, give us a solution to this, because we don't want to die. And then the Lord answers your prayer.
Exactly.
And then you still
It's too quick. Not this way, God. Not this way. Not this way. It's too quick. I didn't say do it like that.
Yeah.
That is so true.
And so that's my other struggle, and my challenge is that we pray and we ask God to answer our prayers.
Exactly.
But when he answers it, what do? We say, oh no, I don't want
Not this way. Not this way. Not this way. But I think it's just, it's a natural response to a complicated problem. And I think sometimes this is why I think talks like this, like these, are really important, because there's demystification of the process. Right. This is where I do feel like I am in the middle, is that I do understand that the federal government doesn't deserve the trust that, I've asked a lot of people of color to give them, because there have been, things that the federal government have done in the past and present that don't merit the respect or the trust that they are asking of us. But, I see science in a completely different bucket, right? I see the science that has been done has been confirmed by thousands of labs around the globe. And one of the things I would say is that, I always tell people, if this is planned, governments across the globe can't even get on the same page about greenhouse gases, right?
Yeah.
To have every government in almost every country plan something this flawlessly would be just, it's not even in alignment with what we see, we've seen the past 4 years. And so yes. I would say to people that, I certainly trust the science, because science is not something where there's a discovery and then the discovery stops. There is discovery and confirmation and more discovery and more refinement and confirmation. And that process is an iterative process, right? And so the one thing that I do see, and it's sort of a self-fulfilled prophecy, if people say, this vaccine isn't going to work. And then because those same people don't get vaccinated, the virus has time to mutate. And then you hear on the news, oh, this variant doesn't work. You know, the Moderna virus, the Pfizer virus isn't as effective. And people are like, see. And I'm like, yeah, you can say see because it took you too long to get vaccinated. And so
Yes.
I you know, sometimes there are self-fulfilled prophecies. And I always tell people, you know, follow the science if you're really interested in understanding how it works, you know, why we are where we are, and what has been done to sort of curtail the pandemic. But here's what I'll also say. There is an article, I think I saw it, I don't remember who published it, but people, you know, if this was planned, there are people that are what we call it like vaccine diving, like dumpster diving. They're going around to places waiting for the end of the day, because once you thaw the vaccine, you can't refreeze it. So when someone makes an appointment to get vaccinated, they thaw just as many vaccines as they have appointments. And when somebody misses their appointment, that vaccine has to go in the garbage. And so people know this. So they go around site to site to site, waiting for the end of the day to say, do you have anything left over? And then they get vaccinated. And so,
Wow.
and second, people are going to communities of color because they know that we're not getting and skipping the line ahead of us.
Wow.
And then the federal government is using our lack of trust and enthusiasm about the virus to shut down vaccination sites. So it's like a circular, you know, you hear in the news, oh, they don't have sites in the Black community, but Black people don't want to get vaccinated, so we took away the sites, so they don't have sites in the Black community, but Black people, you know, it's just a circular, vicious cycle. So I always tell people, if you have the opportunity to get vaccinated, definitely do so, not for yourself, but as you say, as your brother's keeper.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's part of, the push that we're attempting to do here on these discussions, and why I actually came out. I had the virus, and from that conversation, there are other people were interested in specific details about virus, and then of course asking the question, well, are you going to be vaccinated? I said, well, yes. One reason is because I've been vaccinated from everything else. When I was in the military, I know that I don't know all the stuff that I've been vaccinated from with the military.
You just stood in line, right?
And
that's true.
One of the third things is that since I was in the medical field in the military, I gave a whole lot of shots to some folks. So, and then the fourth thing is that I think that it is our responsibility, as human beings. It is our responsibility to be willing to help out our neighbor. Yes. I mean, I take this thing real serious when it says to us that we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. And, as a Christian, I mean, if we don't do that, I mean, really, how can you stand in front of a group of people on Sunday morning, or how can you say that you love the guy who's in the seat next to you, but you refuse to take the vaccination because of some theory that is out there, or some misinformation that's out there? And then the other component is when we talk about, from a scientific standpoint, we talk about the Bible gives witty inventions. What scientists, how? What else can I say?
Yeah, I think that, I think at the end of the day, when I really sit down and talk to someone one-on-one, even the person that has a lot of theories, or whether they be conspiracy theories thought up or real, usually at the end of our conversation, it really just boils down to fear. And when you think about the Bible, we aren't supposed to have a spirit of fear, right?
Yes.
And, usually what people will do is they'll deflect from that fear instead of dealing with it face on. They'll deflect and, pull up a theory, a straw man, to sort of deflect away from what the real issue is. And this is why I do spend a lot of time at least trying as much as I can to talk about the coronavirus, because I think, when you think about at the end of the day, underneath all those layers of conspiracies and thoughts, it's just really simple, cold fear. And I think that, demystification of what the coronavirus is, how the vaccine works. I've even told people, heard people say something around, something to the effect of, it modifies your DNA. And the cynic in me, scientists are, the cynic in me as a scientist, I almost want to say, well, think about it as an opportunity, if that's how, but I don't say that to people.
Yes.
That's what I want to say deep down.
Right.
But, that tells me, okay, let me back up and say to this person, what makes you think it modifies the DNA? Who told you that? Where did you get your information? When you sit down and or even like yesterday, I was talking back and forth with a friend of a friend about the numbers. I just took a screenshot of the CDC to show the death rate. And somebody was like, no, that's not true. Black people are 13% of deaths are Black. And I literally had to walk, and the person had numbers, they just weren't interpreting them correctly. So I had to walk back and go over where the flaws were in the math. And I think that sometimes, and people are, and I always tell people, and I don't mean this facetiously, why do you spend time going through the data, the numbers, when somebody has done that for you? It's all in one neat package in a scientific article. Instead of you saying, okay, Black people make up 12%. This is, this information is already done by somebody that does this day in and day out. You coming off of a 12-hour shift, reading Facebook, doing the numbers, crunching the stats is probably not, the best way to get information out, factual information out.
Right.
And so usually I try to show them where to go to look up the data. I walk them through how they got to the data, how they got to the conclusions that they made. And usually that helps, but that's like after 45 minutes of breaking through all those barriers. And at the end of the day, it's really fear. People won't admit that, especially men, but it's usually just fear.
And that's part of, when I had my conversation with my mother about the virus, and my uncle, of course, he and I had some discussions too. And, he's a pastor in South Louisiana. And so we had this discussion, and we were at this point where, all right, there are people who are afraid of a whole lot of stuff, but they get in their car every day and drive, and so if you get in your car and drive and you can't control the 2,000 or 5,000 people that you just passed every day, and you have the opportunity to control this situation, which means you can sign up for the vaccination. They give you all the details of it. It's been tested in various different markets, very different countries, and you don't want to take it. Help me understand that. You take a risk to get in your car, but you won't take this vaccination.
That's converging interest, right? So that is, people will take the risk to get in the car because it's getting them somewhere to work where they make money, so they can justify the risk that they take every day. With the coronavirus, so because of the benefit of taking that risk, you don't see people putting out articles about how dangerous cars are. And even when people put out, the danger to the earth, people shoot that down as granola, wholesome, tree hugging, right? But but when you talk about the coronavirus, people don't see where the converging interests are, because they don't see the direct benefit to themselves. So when I talk to a lot of people that won't get it, they're like, I'm young, I'm healthy, I'm good. So there's no benefit in it for me to help somebody else. And helping somebody else is just not good enough of a risk for me. It's not good enough of a reason for me to take that risk. So usually when I see um, people taking, when I use the analogy, you take risk, but usually it's because of converging interests. They'll take the risk because there's a perceived benefit down the road. The people that typically that I meet, they tend to be anywhere between 20 and 40. They don't take it because there's no convergent interest, because they feel like they're healthy, and the coronavirus, if they get it, it'll be mild anyway.
Mm-hmm. But they don't know that there are people who are 20,
Yeah.
30, 40 who are dying.
Yes.
When you talk to them, they say, well, not that many. I'm healthy. If I just eat right, exercise right, I can get beyond this. I have the right blood type.
Mm-hmm.
You hear all they check in the boxes,
Mm-hmm.
so the chances, if I would have gotten it, I've been to the gym 10 times. If I would have gotten it, I would have gotten it by now. So I bet I've gotten it and just been asymptomatic. So I'm good. I'm immune. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not until you work at a hospital and you hear or you work in a city where a lot of Black people and brown people are dying, that you realize that this is the biggest disservice to the Black community, is this feeling of, if I pray, I'm going to be safe, because if I'm not going to trust in God, somehow
Right.
God is going to protect me, or B, I'm healthy.
Right.
So what's the point of me getting it? Some people feel like there's this without converging interest, there's no incentive, or I guess better words, incentive for people to get it.
Yeah, and that's you brought up this issue of people who are saying, well, I pray and God is going to heal me. Well, God is going to heal you through medicine. I mean, you talk about witty inventions. I always go back to tell people that when I'm praying for them, I'm saying we're praying that God is going to give you the opportunity to be healed some kind of way. It could be through medicine, or it could be miraculous. And since he is the one who creates these individuals, and these individuals have this insight to create medicine that comes from various different sources, and they're able to put these combinations together. My question is, do you just want to continue to wait on the Lord to do something miraculous? Or do you want to go in and let the Lord heal you through this medication that is out there?
Right.
So you brought up a really good point that I hear when I talk to Christian leaders or religious leaders in general. There's this line between what some people perceive to be fundamentalism versus what's the other word I'm looking for? Being a fundamentalist versus a practical a believer in God. And sometimes when it just depends on what day of the week, who I'm speaking to. There is this belief that if you are a practical Christian, you don't really believe, because you don't believe in the fundamental words, of God, right? So because you don't, and there, there are people that still, handle snakes. There are still people that, do a lot of those things because they believe that, the work, and I believe that too. Maybe I fall on the side of just being practical. I feel like even as a scientist, I don't see God as a genie. I feel like God helps those who help themselves. To lay back, be lazy, and expect somebody even God to do something for me is almost an insult to the power of God, to just use his power, as some kind of, magic wand, is just, to me, as a Christian, disrespectful. But I do believe in grace. I do believe that I'm provided for, and God has blessed me, and there's no merit, in anything that I've done to deserve any of it. But at the same time, I feel like that's God's, that's God's will to do as he feels, or not, for me. So I don't feel like I wield control over that. So I have to do my part as a Christian, and put the work forth, so that when he is ready to bless me or do something miraculous, I'm in a position to receive it. I've done everything that I could possibly do, on my part. And I do feel like there is a very fine line between, if you say, God has put these group of people, because he's a creator of science and medicine, in position to help us move beyond this. There are some people that are like, well, then you don't believe in the power of God, because God alone, can cure us of this. And so I do run into sort of, and I think when I talk to people that do flip-flop, there is this, if I just believe strongly, because if I just have that mustard seed of faith, he's going to heal me. And, that's a, yeah.
And I understand what you're saying there. And there are people who are, at this point in their lives where the only thing they focus on is they think, well, yeah, God is going to heal me. And I often tell the story about the man who was in the ocean and he was drowning. And he asked, the Lord to help him. And so the guy came by in a little canoe. And the man say, hey, brother, you want me to help you? And the man say, no, I'm waiting on the Lord to send somebody. And then a guy came by in a bass boat. And the guy he's drinking water. But guess what? He said, oh, I'm waiting on the Lord to come by and help me. And then the Coast Guard came by, and they came by and told him, hey, brother, we're here to save you. That's our job. And the fellow said, hey, no, I'm waiting on the Lord to help me. And so when he gets to heaven, the Lord say, fool, I sent 3 people to see you. And guess what? You would have been okay. But since you didn't listen, since you didn't accept the people that I sent by, that's why you're up here with me right now. So that's what I tell people is that the Lord puts people in our lives.
Yeah.
And it's not by accident. And this virus, it came about right at this particular moment because God had the scientists who had the ability to crack this code and to create the vaccine in a record amount of time. And that's God moving. Just imagine if this would have hit us in 1980.
It would have been done.
90, we would have been done.
Yeah.
But God saw fit to put all the pieces together, to make sure that, yes, there's a lot of people who passed away. I'm not negating that. I'm not downplaying that. However, God made sure that the right scientists were in position, the right education, the right experiences, that they're able to crack this thing in a record amount of time. So, I understand that the individuals who are in both of those groups who think those particular ways, but I know the God that I serve, and I've seen people who have been raised from the dead. I've seen that. I also seen some folks who went to the doctor and they were about to have a heart attack and the doctor gave them the pill and they kept them alive. So I've seen both extremes.
Exactly.
So when they call you, send them to me, I'll help you out on that.
I gotta tell you, it's nice to hear the humor from a pastor.
Yes.
Oftentimes, at least for somebody like me, when we talk to spiritual leaders, it's always a tense conversation because it's not that we're saying we don't believe in God, but I do believe that God put, as you said, scientists in a position to be able to move us forward beyond this. And, I always tell people that I definitely trust the scientists as a scientist. When I see the number of Black and brown people dying, I can't help but say something. And when I see the amount of misinformation that is being spread about the coronavirus, and it's not that I'm people think, oh, you're a scientist, everybody in your family is going to get vaccinated. I have, people that don't believe in science in my immediate family. And so, it's just trying to convince them that, this is safe and, you can wait to get in line. You get in the back, just get in the back of the line, but get in the line, to get vaccinated. Just get in the line and we'll take care of the rest. But, science can only carry us so far. It can't, science is only as good as the willingness of the participants to take the vaccine. And the longer we wait, they have 3 or 4 variants right now that are wreaking havoc in other areas of the world. And then they're starting to pop up here in the States. And if we don't get vaccinated, pretty soon those variants will be the predominant variant. And all the hard work that has been done, it's not that it'll be undone. It's just that you'll have to get back in line to get the booster. You'll have to get back in line to get the modified version, of the virus to deal with that particular variant. And I don't know about you, but after having chills for a whole night, I want this to be a one vaccination event and one and done. Like, I don't want to do this again.
Amen. Amen.
I don't know about you, but I'm good.
Yeah.
It's easier than actually having the coronavirus, but spending a whole night with the chills is definitely not fun. So I want this to be a one and done. And, I just hope that something that we said today, I hope that, listening to a pastor, usually, as you said, a lot of pastors have been in the pulpit saying, don't get it. We engage, at least in Chicago, 50 pastors, and still there is a level of hesitation there because of, I could tell you in the Hispanic community, just in Texas alone, there's a lot of hysterectomies being performed on people that are being caged up at the border, right? And so, there's a earned distrust in the Hispanic community. I understand why they don't trust the federal government. I completely, and at some instances, I agree with it. But when it comes to the coronavirus, Hispanic people are dying, for an example, at, almost 3 times the rates of white people. So, they, like us, we cannot, I hope both of our communities understand the significance of this moment, and that, because of, the US does not get to herd immunity without the Hispanic and Black communities. Together we make up about 30% of the population. And if you want to get to herd immunity, you need 1/3 of us, to be vaccinated.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what, I think we have to continue to push forward on, is really encouraging our communities to not only be vaccinated, but also, take that shot of, and post it on Facebook and say, hey, I took the shot. Second, I'm still alive. And, 3, me.
Right.
So,
Right.
I didn't grow another arm, another leg.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to help us out. But, we've been on for 1 hour and 32 minutes. And
I enjoyed it.
Conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Janet, for being on with us too.
I appreciate you.
Thank you.
And Miranda, thank you very much.
I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And we'll have you back again. Hopefully
Absolutely.
Next week we'll be back on.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about this psychological issue that people are dealing with. And of course, the fear that's out there, the anxiety that's out there that people are experiencing right now. We're going to have to deal with that because based on my discussion today, I was talking with some financial folks, and we're going to see the financial pain of this sometime in June, July. I know people think we've experienced it already, but in actuality, June or July of this year is when we're going to hit this point where there's going to be some financial pain. There's going to be some anxiety that people are going to experience. And when people don't have money and they don't have enough money, that creates another issue in our society. So, and insecurity exists. So we're going to come back. We're going to get you back on, Miranda. Thank you very much.
Happy to participate.
I'm proud of you. I know Barbara's proud of you also.
Yeah, we're happy. We're so happy to participate. My mom is here. So I thank you for having us on. And, I always tell people, if we don't get vaccinated, who they lay off first.
That's right. And there's already companies in America, and we're going to talk about this later on next month. There are places in America right now that are asking the people, have you been vaccinated? And if you've not been vaccinated, they are actively off. And that's not a lot of conversation about that. But folks who work on military bases, if you don't get vaccinated, they're going to terminate your relationship with that particular institution.
Or if we don't get vaccinated, you're right. If we don't get vaccinated, what really happens is we stay in this stay-at-home period. Companies lose money and they lay off. And like I said, who do they lay off first?
That's right.
So,
that's right.
So
right.
I don't think that we understand, and especially in jobs where Black and brown people have made such strides, we're the first people that typically are hit hardest, by whether it's bias or otherwise. We're typically the first group of people that suffer the most and longest layoffs. So, not getting vaccinated in some instances is just not an option for us.
Right. You're right there. Thank you guys very much for being on. Just want to thank our audience for being a part of this conversation today. We'll be back next week at about 7:00, and we'll even talk more about how to survive the coronavirus. And we're going to talk about it from the mental health standpoint. And thank you very much, Miranda. Thank you, Janet.
So much.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you all at the next family reunion.
All right, you take care. All right, goodbye. Bye.